I am talking to Paul Lundberg, former City Council President. There have been a number of procedural surprises in this election, and we are hoping that Paul can help us understand them. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Heather. How are you? Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, it's great to have you on. We spoke recently to you about the charter, and we're hoping that your charter expertise can illuminate some of these interesting turns in the election. Let's start with the Ward 3 race. Adam Orlando was running unopposed. Then he withdrew, but not before the ballot was certified by the City Council. His name is the only one on the Ward 3 ballot for Ward Councilor. Then Frank Margiotta and Bob Wynot jumped in the race as write-ins. My first question is, what happens if Orlando wins?
So Orlando is the only certified candidate on the ballot. And notwithstanding what he's told the public, his position on the ballot still is valid, and people can vote for him. What will happen, what has to happen is on election night, if the votes are counted and he is the winner, then he has to make a formal declaration that he will not take the oath of office. At that point, the city clerk can move on to the next procedural steps involving write-in candidates. But that's the first thing that has to happen. He is the certified candidate. People may vote for him. They may not have heard the news. They may not like the news. Who knows what the voters will say? But if he gets votes and he's the winner, then he must formally declare after he's the winner that he will not take the oath of office.
So we have these two write-in candidates, and how many votes are they required to receive in order to move into the seat?
Right. So under the charter, if there's a vacancy for a ward councilor, and the language is broad enough to take into account this particular situation. So if there is a vacancy after the election, which would require the steps that I just described, then the next person who got votes, and these can be write-in votes, who had the most votes will become the elected city councilor, as long as that person gets 30% of the votes cast in Ward 3.
Okay, so what if that doesn't happen? Because that's possible, right?
Well, first of all, just to give everyone some context, the last time we had a contested municipal election on the mayor's side, we had 11,000 we have 20,000 voters in Gloucester, and 11,000 showed up to the polls. In Ward 3, there were 1,500 voters voted in that election. So somewhere in that, we're going to probably see that many Ward 3 voters this time, around 1,500. So a write-in candidate has to get 30% of 1,500 voters, which is, let's see, 450.
Nice.
So that's a lot of write-in votes. There's no other way to say it. And yes, there are two candidates who are conducting write-in campaigns, but still the practicalities of a write-in campaign are difficult. And there's the write-in has to have a certain legibility. For instance, there has to be candidates can provide voters with stickers with their name on it in the right size and all that sort of thing. But again, from a logistics standpoint, that's really hard to get that done, as well as making the voters aware that there's another choice other than the one printed on the ballot. But whoever's going to, if a write-in candidate is successful, it's going to require them to have gotten, close to 500 write-in votes.
So if there were only one write-in candidate, that would be a lot easier, but we actually have a race happening for those 450 votes between the two write-ins.
Yeah, it'll be tough for either of them to get that many votes, but they've got only about not too many days left before election day. So
what does happen if neither one of them gets 450 votes?
Well, we return to the charter. And the charter says that if there is no candidate that has received the requisite number of votes, either officially or write-in, then it goes to the city council to elect a voter from the ward. So what would have to happen, and this would all be after the new city council is seated on January 1st.
Oh, okay. So we wait until then. So
we would wait until then, yes.
Okay, all right.
And at that point, there would be officially a vacancy in Ward 3. So the charter provides a method by which that the city council will vote for a voter from that ward. And what normally happens, what's happened in the past, and it's happened a couple of times recently, is interested people in the ward, could be the people who are waging write-in campaigns, make known to the city council their interest in becoming the city councilor. And then the council does a vetting process. You know, it's like people applying for a job, and they see who's interested, and then they would elect a person to fill that job. The last time this happened, I was on the council. Councilor Jackie Hardy, who represented Ward 4, was ill and left the council, and there was no one who had received any votes after her. So it came to the city council to pick a voter in Ward 4, and 3 or 4 people raised their hand and said, "I'd like to be considered." Council deliberated on those people and elected one of them, Bob Stewart.
Mm. So have you ever seen a situation like this before? I mean, there are a lot of different pieces to this, but someone running unopposed or the competition between 2 write-ins. I mean, that's kind of unusual, right?
No, this is very unusual, right? And I think that it's sent the city clerk and the official people back to the rule books to see exactly how this will work.
Well, so
and they have not only one of these, they have 2 or 3 of them, happening simultaneously. So
right, yeah. So let's talk about Ward 2 and this re-precincting. I can't even say that issue. Re-precincting. So the boundaries were changed by the state. And why does the state determine a city's precinct map? I'd like to know that.
Yeah, so this all has to do with the census. And, every 10 years the census is taken. And one of the uses of the census is to redistrict voting districts so that to make sure that each district properly represents the number of people in that district. There's a lot in the news about that sort of thing going on in terms of some of the bigger districts where there are racial components and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's a numbers thing to try and make sure that each voting entity, whether it's a precinct that's in a city or a town, or a congressional district or whatever, has an approximately the right number of voters. And that means that the map makers, the elected officials who are in charge of setting these districts, have some work to do in terms of changing the boundaries. And it comes down to the real nuts and bolts stuff like we have here in Ward 2, where in Gloucester, the population has changed significant enough between wards 1 and 2. Ward 1 is basically East Gloucester, and Ward 2 is basically that end of the downtown area that abuts East Gloucester, that those populations have changed enough that Ward 2 has to give up some voters to Ward 1. Mm. And so what happened was the line was redrawn, and it put Friend Street into Ward 1, where it is today in Ward 2. Usually not a big deal, and nobody would notice, except one of the candidates for city council lives on Friend Street in Ward 2, and she is running for Ward 2 councilor.
Who could have imagined that would happen?
No one could have.
Yeah. So these are state decisions. So it was kind of interesting to me that the state draws these. I mean, I realize they draw the legislative and federal boundaries, but I didn't realize they did precincts also.
And so what happened here in Gloucester is the state does all that, and then they send a packet of stuff to the governing body of the city or town, the city council or the board of selectmen, who then have to look at that, make sure it's all okay, and then they vote on it. And our city council did that last week. they voted to approve the redistricting that included this change that impacted the race. Now, go ahead.
Well, could they have not approved it? Is that possible?
So they could have not approved it if they had numerical reasons not to approve it, but just out of general policy, unless the numbers are incorrect. If the numbers are correct, then it's pretty much they approve it.
So the fact that one of the Ward 2 city councilor who is running against the person living on Friend Street, Tracy ONeil, the fact that he was approving this really was just a matter of procedure. He had
a matter of procedure, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So then the city did, there was a little confusion about what would happen to Tracy's candidacy if she were to be elected. That has been cleared up by the state, by the Secretary of State's office, legal department, who, when asked by the city, said, no, the election boundaries will not be effective until the next municipal election in 2023. So for purposes of this election, the election boundaries will remain the same. So if whoever is elected in Ward 2 will be the elected person, and if it's Tracy ONeil living on Friend Street, then she will be the winner, and she will be okay to serve Ward 2. Now that will change while she's serving on Ward 2, and then the following year in 2023, it'll be a different situation.
So, but that is only for this election that they made an exception. Okay, I wondered about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's, again, do you think there's any precedent for this? Have you ever seen anything like this?
There's no precedent for this. This has not happened in anybody's memory in the city of Gloucester. I think one thing just to be said, you know, there are, in most instances, rules to cover these things. They just have to be sorted through, you know, mindfully, and then everybody made aware of them. So I think, you know, the city is working toward clarity here, but it's certainly a lot more of a challenge than normal.
And a big part of the problem here is that the census was late, the
Correct.
reports. So the state was operating behind the ball already, right?
Correct. Right. And you're right, Heather, this was something that, had there not been COVID and municipal and bureaucratic snafus, these issues would have arisen much earlier than 2 weeks ago, and they would have been sorted through then. So the unfortunate thing for the candidates running in Ward 2 is they surfaced last week, and they had to kind of deal with them on the run, so to speak.
So do you think there are any other communities dealing with this? Because other communities are having elections, right? I mean, and it's kind of a tough time to receive this news.
Correct. And I would guess the answer is probably yes. I don't know of any, but it sure seems likely, given the, you know, the uncertainty that the pandemic has thrown into everything, and it's certainly into all these procedures. It's just taking longer to get stuff done.
Right. Okay, last question. Do you think the charter is doing a good job at managing all these surprises? Can we look to that charter and find answers?
So I suppose the test of any, you know, governing document is does it deal with the situations that the framers couldn't have thought of when they made it? And that, you know, that's one of those constitutional debates. In terms of the city charter on that specific issue, yeah, I think it worked okay. You know, there are some people who say, you know, there should be then another election in Ward 3 instead of having write-ins, but you know, who knows if that's not what the charter provides for. And that question is for another day, whether people can debate that. But these exceptions that have arisen here are so unusual. You know, it's like, how many things can you think of to cover in a document? So far, the charter has done a good job of sorting them through, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much for helping us. There's a lot to learn from you, so thank you.
A lot to learn, and it means that your job on election night will be really interesting.
It's going to be so interesting. Yeah, we're going to have some good conversations. So make sure you're at City Hall so we can talk to you again.
Okay. Very good. Thank
right.
you, Heather.
Take care.
Bye.